What does it take to succeed as a senior technical leader? And by senior, I mean CTO or close to it. And not the polished LinkedIn version that you see all over the place, but the truth. And if you're earlier in your leadership career and CTO is your target destination, what does that career path look like? What skills do you need to develop in order to reach your target? Today, I am joined by a genuine industry megastar, somebody who has lived this for herself, but has also shaped it and helped many people reach their own goals. Meri Williams. Meri is perhaps best known for being CTO at Monzo, but she was also CTO at M&S.com, Moo, Healx and Pleo. She worked for the government digital services. She is non-executive director of Flagstone. She is an international speaker. She is an author, and she's chairperson of the Lead Dev Conference. A truly stellar CV. So if you want to hear from somebody who has been there, seen it and done it and can help you, Meri is the person that you should talk to. Today, she's bringing along for you her Career Vectors framework. It's 6 dimensions, 6 capabilities, and it allows you to measure yourself against the job you have or the job you want. And if you're a CEO and you're hiring a senior leader, equally, you can use it to map the demands of your particular job. So whether you're at the beginning of your career and you're heading towards CTO, whether you've been offered a CTO role and you want to know whether you should take it, or whether you are already in a senior leadership position and you want to understand where your strengths and growth areas are, Meri's framework and this episode is for you. Let's get into it. Meri, I am super happy that you're here today. Thank you so much indeed for joining my show. If anybody doesn't know who you are, and I very much doubt that is the case because you are a bit of a star, you are an industry technology leader. You were CTO at Monzo. You've had leadership roles at Marks and Spencer's and various other places. You're a non-executive director at Flagstone, and you are chair of the Lead Dev Conference, and you're an international speaker, and you're an author. So an all-round superstar, and I'm really happy that you're here today. So thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me.
Good. I'd love to start with talking about your evolution, because I mean, I've seen your handle. You're clearly a geek. You love coding and everything to do with technology. So you've been on a journey from being an engineer all the way up to the giddy heights of massive companies. What was that pathway like for you? How did you evolve, and how did you almost leave behind the technology parts of that and become a leader?
Yeah, so I had a bit of an upside down career actually. So I spent the first 10 years I studied computer science at University of Bath, and part of why I went to Bath, I got in at Cambridge but chose not to go, was that Bath had a really great industry placement program, and I was an overseas student. I was paying a lot for my degree, and so I really wanted to be sure that I was going to have a job at the end of it. So getting some work experience during university felt like a great idea, and so I was a summer intern at Procter and Gamble in the summer of my first year of university, and I ended up being there for 10 years. So I started very young. I joined when I was 19 and left when I was 29, and that was very much a corporate IT type job. I did do engineering, and then I became an architect, but a lot of it was about project management, product management, looking after big systems. I used to run the biggest SAP install in the world, but I'm okay now.
You got over that one. Yeah, well done.
And so I think I actually moved out of being hands-on technical much earlier in my career than I really wanted to, or in retrospect would have preferred to, partly because there wasn't a route up that didn't look like becoming a manager. And so I became a manager very young, and my first two direct reports were older than my dad, and I could just imagine his reaction to a
Right.
manager the age of his daughter. And it was a bit tough. But I was very resolute that if I had to be a manager, I refused to be bad at it. And so I went and looked for research and information about how to be good at this. And makes me a total nerd, but I have a favorite management book, which is First Break All the Rules, which is based on this huge Gallup study where they talk to hundreds of thousands of people, looking across industries, across all sorts of organizations and within organizations as well, looking for what made people high performing. But it actually reads like a list of things that will make people happy. And that really appealed to me, that you could have high performance and fulfillment in the same breath. And so spent my first 10 years at P&G. P&G did a huge outsourcing whilst I was there. Almost everybody who was really technical went off to HP and to IBM. And I, ironically, had been put in quite a businessy role because they were worried I was too technical. And so I was on the wrong side of the line as an intern when the big separation happened. And so I stayed on the P&G side and ended up being one of the most technical people left on the P&G side. And so when they realized they'd outsourced a bit too much, I was the obvious person to take over a load of the technical work that came back in. And so I went from being an engineer and then really a more architectural role, had a few years of product and program and project management, and then was the leader of what was called application management, so this sort of SAP FICO area with a bunch of engineers. And then my final role was what was called a broadening assignment. So again, trying to make me more businessy, they gave me all of North European operations to look after, and that was not just what we think, DevOps style ops, but it was everything from like facilities and catering to the physical networks and the mobile networks and the laptops and everything that made an office or a plant or a research center. So I was responsible for about 11,000 employees in that last role and a $100 million budget, which in retrospect, giving a $100 million budget to a 27-year-old is absolutely mental.
Doesn't Justin Bieber talk about that? Doesn't he sort of say, like, this is what happens when you give a 27-year-old $400 million or something? Yeah.
Yeah. And then I realized in that role that though I loved Procter and it was a fantastic place to learn leadership because it's incredibly indexed on leadership. They hire people who've shown early leadership potential and then they promote from within. And so the people who were running the company when I was an intern had started as graduates and spent 30 years there and now ran the company. And it was a fascinating environment. And I think P&G produces more C-level execs for other companies than any company in the world except for General Electric. And so it was a great environment to be in. But I realized that I used to joke that we weren't on the bleeding edge. We were on the sort of scabbing edge or healing edge of technology. Okay. We were only adopting things when it was really safe, and that felt a little off kilter to me. I really love tech, and I wanted to be closer to tech done modern ways in a really good standard, and to build some stuff that wasn't just add-ons to big box systems for a while. And so I left and I was going to go to Amazon or Google, and my academic background is AI, so I'd been having conversations with Google for years, and then a guy called Tom Loosemore rang me up and said, hey, we're going to fix government, come help us. And then he called my friends and got them to convince me to come and join the government digital service, because he was like, join Google whenever you like, but this is going to happen once and once only. And so I joined just as the alpha was finished for GovUK, and the beta team had been assembled, and then scaled that from 30 to 300 people in 9 months, which was very intense. I had 80 direct reports at one point, which was very, very intense. 80 one-to-ones a month is far too many.
I was going to say, I was bring that up. Yeah, that's your week gone completely, isn't it?
Yeah. pretty much. You have to do monthly one-to-ones in that situation. And yeah, I was very proud to be part of the journey that built GovUK. I then got my disability diagnosis, took a bit of time out to deal with that, and then drifted around a little bit for a couple of years, and then did a medtech startup that went a bit wrong, actually. We stuck together as a team and formed a little product studio called Balloon, and because it was our analogy was that we were trying to have a hot air balloon together rather than individual parachutes. And then M&S hired us as a team, and then slowly convinced us to go in-house. And so that's the quite roundabout way that I ended up as CTO for M&S.com. I then went to Moo, and then to Monzo, and then to a company called Healx that did AI-driven drug discovery, and then on to Pleo. So I've been in CTO roles for about 10 years now, but actually my largest ever team I had at Procter & Gamble before I left, which was over 300 people. And that was a real exercise in scaling yourself as a leader and a manager. And that's one of the things that I've probably got a lot of opinions on now, is how do you move from being a great manager of and leader of a team of 10 to a team of 300. There's quite a lot of steps in that journey, and that was really fascinating to navigate and to learn along the way.
And that's really what we're going to be diving into today. But before I move on to that, I just want to say to you that I've said this before on a few other shows. For me, the government digital services is the best example of clean design, ease of use, consistency. It's amazing. So if you were part of that, thank you.
I was so delighted to have been part of it, because it was bringing modern ways of working and true agile to government in a way that I don't think anybody imagined was possible. And full credit to Tom. He went in there. Martha Lane Fox had brought him in to just do it, prove it was possible, not by writing papers, not by convincing ministers, by doing it. And that really was the key to success, was to show rather than tell.
And it's probably, from the outside, one of the most boring things that you could do, like build a government website. But the transformation from, I used to do VAT returns. The transformation from that to doing your self-assessment now is incredible. So well done. Thank you. I'd love to ask you, clearly you're now a seasoned CTO. Surely there's just an expectation that to get to that level, you've just got to be like an all-round superstar on every part of that. And they're the sort of people who rise to the very top.
I think I think you have to be high performing, but I think that there's lots of different flavors of CTO, right? There are CTOs who are really more of a chief architect. There are CTOs who are like a chief scientist almost, in places where the tech is the product. Neo4j, for instance, has someone who I think of as a chief scientist type profile. You've got some folks where it's all about leading a large group of people. You've got some folks where it's all about the ways of working. And so I think there's this real diversity and mix in a very positive way. There's not a huge amount of variety in CFOs. CFOs are fairly consistent. What's fascinating about the CTO role is how many different versions there are of it and how different people do it. And I think that one of the things that's super true in tech leadership is that our early careers do not prepare us well for the point where we become leaders and managers, because there's not a lot about talking to computers that teaches you to deal with talking to humans really well. Computers do exactly what you tell them to do. Whether it's what you want them to do is a separate problem, but they're very obedient, right? And humans are not. And so I think one of the things you have to accept in tech is that it's a career change when you move into leadership and management, not a progression. And if you think it's just a promotion, then you fall into this trap of imagining that what got you here will get you there, and it just won't. The things that make you a great engineer and a great developer, some of them remain really helpful. So deeply understanding users, understanding the business context, understanding what's possible with technology, all of that really helps. But you've also then got to start thinking about, business realities and people, and you start working a lot more on the system rather than in the system. And I think that's a really fascinating change. And it's not one that everybody navigates really well. There's a lot of people who've ended up as managers in tech who probably never should have become a manager.
Hmm.
I'm a firm believer that you can learn every skill and you can gain all sorts of knowledge. But I run a course called Be a Brilliant People Developer. And one of my success metrics for that is that some people leave having realized that they don't have it in them to be a great manager and that they shouldn't be a manager anymore. And actually I've had probably as much positive feedback from on that course from people who've had that realization as from people who've come away thinking, okay, now I can be better at this. um, and so I think it's a really interesting industry in that it's such a different job at the point that you move into that. And the one thing you can't teach anybody is how to care about people.
Hmm.
So that's my minimum bar for managers is you've got to care. You've got to care about the people side, and you've got to care about the people as humans. That I'm not sure it can be taught. I think that's an intrinsic motivation thing, and I think you can learn all the skills of like how to apply that care and what to do with it. But I think it's very difficult to instill a desire to look after people in someone who just doesn't have it.
Yeah, I agree. I've mentioned this before, but I see three different dimensions. There's knowledge, there's skill, and then there's behavior. And I would put the people part of it into the behavior.
Mm,
You can grow skill and knowledge. That's relatively straightforward, but someone's character, their behavior, the way they are, the person they are,
mm.
you
Very
kind of, you
different.
exactly, you walk in as that person. That's who you're going to be. And funny enough, just last night, I recorded another episode with another CTO, and the topic was, yeah, you're an engineer, is moving into management the right thing? So that will probably come out before this episode, and it's probably worth other people watching and listening to that. I'd love to ask you something else before we get into the real content, and that is that surely once you've moved into that position, you're now a CTO. Presumably, you can just lift and shift and go somewhere else now because you're now a CTO and just be a good CTO in any different setting.
And I think there's definitely some transferable skills, but the reality is that there's different needs at different companies, right? So sometimes they need a transformation person, sometimes they need a inspirational person, sometimes they need someone who's going to really reformat the business and make tech a advantage rather than a blocker. And so I think it's a lovely thought that we can just cut and paste, but it doesn't often work. And actually, some of the biggest disasters I've had were when I thought, oh, I've done this before. I'll just do what I did at the
Right.
last place.
I'm Meri. What can go wrong? Yeah.
I mean, a lot can go wrong, I definitely don't have the sort of confidence that I think you assume I have.
Right.
But yeah, and I think being really tailored to the environment is super important. One of the things that was a big change for me at Monzo was the technical standard was so high.
Mm,
I didn't have to make sure that we made architectural decisions that could allow for average engineers anymore.
right.
I, I could optimize for great engineers. And that's not a thing many businesses have the opportunity or the right to do. It's great engineers are expensive, and you have to you have to give them more autonomy, you have to give them more credit and more mastery. And I took too long to adjust to that reality when I was there. I kind of didn't appreciate what I had around me immediately. And that was a big learning for me when I was at Monzo. Was like, oh, you can take much bigger swings when
Hmm.
you've got immense talent there. And that's not to say that any of my previous teams were untalented at all. They just weren't that they weren't necessarily as invested in solving difficult technical problems as many of the people at Monzo were. And that was a real joy to
Hmm.
work with folks who were so excited, both about fixing banking and making money work for everyone and making a better thing exist in the world, but also about like, oh, difficult technical stuff was an excitement rather than a dread.
Yeah. And what happens when a CTO goes into a situation where there is clearly a mismatch? And we're going to get into what do we mean by a mismatch, of course, but if there is a mismatch, if there's your set of skills and experiences and the way you are is different to what is needed in that setting, what happens?
I think you slowly realize that the expectations on you are very different than what you assumed. And if you're lucky, that happens with a CEO who is a good manager and is a good leader and is willing, having selected you, to invest in getting you to where you need to be. And if it's not a great situation, then sometimes you get fired.
Right. Yeah.
Sometimes you don't end up keeping the role. Um, and one of the challenges, I think, is that quite often job specs are written, I think the word's perfunctory.
Generically?
Yeah, generically, or like it's an annoyance, that
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
it has to be written. And so CTO job specs look very similar on the whole. They are quite similar.
Yeah.
CTOs are not very similar. And there are definitely these archetypes of different framings and different approaches. And so I think that in general, we should think of it more, putting the right people on the right challenge is a matter of casting rather than cookie cutting.
I like
And
that
I
casting.
think
It's
that,
almost like the right actor for the role
yeah,
almost. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And of course, there are some actors who are ridiculously talented and can play anything, right? You'd put Meryl Streep in any movie that you thought of, right? But there are some that you wouldn't. And it
Yeah.
doesn't make them a worse actor. It's just very hard to imagine someone who's an amazing dramatic actor being wonderfully comedic. I adore Kate McKinnon. I think she's hilarious. I can't imagine her in a straight role. Like, I can't
Yeah.
imagine her doing a kind of dramatic role or similar. And it's always lovely when you do see an actor who can span genres and that kind of thing. But it's often their ability to become a novice again that makes them capable of doing that. They have to go back to being not good at it
Yeah.
and then get good again in order to succeed. And I think the same is true in leadership roles. You're either cast well for it or not. And it's why I think there are CTOs who are right for certain stages of the business and not for other stages. I'm not a great CTO for early stage businesses. I am not great with immense uncertainty and pivoting every 5 minutes to figure out what the right product market fit is. I'm much better at the point where there's a clear path to profitability. We know which direction we're going, and now we've got to go there faster, cheaper, better, stronger. And that's the sweet spot for me. Is I'm much better in that situation. When I joined Monzo, it wasn't that situation quite yet, and I found it distressing that I didn't have a
Hmm.
budget. And
Right.
Tom Blom took me aside and at one point and went, literally every engineer you hire increases the value of the company more than they cost. So just hire every engineer you can find who's good enough. And that
Wow.
just blew my mind. And I was not equipped to operate in that kind of situation. I was like, but hang on, if I overhire, we'll end up getting rid of people. It will
Hmm.
be, you end up doing layoffs. And he just had a perspective that was like, they're literally adding more value than they cost. So we can all, and it's an incredibly high leverage role. We can almost have unlimited engineers, and it will be fine. And that was the stage the business was at, and I was just not well suited or well prepared for that in those very early days of my role there. And I think I adjusted eventually, but it took me a minute. Um,
Right. I bet. Yeah. And then the opposite is true also. If you get come back to the actor, you get the right actor into the right role, magic happens.
yeah.
So in a CTO situation, the right CTO lands in the right situation, what improves?
I think everything improves. I think you get an improvement in culture and delivery and the technology and in tech becoming more of a value creation engine rather than a cost center, which is, a thing we've struggled against for a
Yeah.
very long time. I mean, CTOs they used to be CIOs, and they used to report into finance. You used to have CIO into CTO into CIO into CFO into CEO.
Yeah.
And, there's no there's no more sort of damning indictments than to be underfinanced because you're just a cost center,
You're a cost
right?
center. Yeah.
And I don't think, and I saw a quote recently where who was it? It was probably Laura Tucker or someone like that. Anyway, but somebody said only cost centers brag about cost savings, and that made me
Mm,
really stop and think and
yeah.
go, hang on a minute, actually, that's true. And obviously sometimes cost savings are important and they matter a lot. And if you can improve gross margin of the business by cutting your hosting costs, then it's worth doing. But if all you're ever talking about is cost savings, then it's no surprise that people are going to think of you as a cost center.
Yeah. And I guess that might be true of like a really established company that's very stable and yeah, massive market presence. Then I guess technology needs to trim the cloth a bit. But so um, you and I, when we were talking and planning this, you have this idea that the CTO and the CEO should sit down and have an honest conversation
Mm,
and set the expectations of the role, which would come from the business leader, and the CTO's capabilities almost against the same set of 6 dimensions.
yeah.
So before we get into exactly what that is, I'd love to understand from you, when is the right time to have that conversation? Is it before you go into the role to make sure you're going to be a good fit? Is it immediately when you're in the role so you understand the path ahead? Or even is it later on when you're thinking, I'd love to understand where we're going and how I need to adapt?
So I think having clear expectations with your leader and your manager is always valuable. So I think any of those points can add value. I think the smartest time to do it is actually before you take the role. Going
Right.
at, am I the right person for this? Now, I probably haven't sat down with the detailed framework with somebody before I've taken a role, but I have gone, well, I'm a scaling type CTO. I've got multiple industries experience. I'm not a depth in one industry CTO. Are you sure that that's okay for this quite in-depth role? And so that was one of the conversations I had with Tim at Helix before I joined, was like, I hadn't ever done drug discovery. I hadn't ever worked in med tech before. I obviously had a lot of understanding of regulatory constraints and issues from having been in fintech and other areas like that. And I did a lot of Sarbanes-Oxley implementation when I was at P&G and that kind of thing. So I was confident I could learn it. But I wasn't coming as an expert in drug discovery into that role at all, and I pushed him quite hard on whether that was going to be a problem and whether there would be the grace period for me to learn about it. Now, I've got a rare disease. It's a company focused on treatments for rare diseases, and so as a patient, I had loads of empathy and loads of knowledge about how hard it is to not find treatments and what Helix does is basically use AI to find drugs that already exist that can be reused for new diseases,
Okay.
and they do that for rare diseases because rare diseases don't get the investment that is needed because there's not enough people that need the drug to warrant billions being spent developing a new drug. And so if you can find either individual drugs or combinations of drugs that will have a positive impact, you still have to run preclinical trials and clinical
Yeah.
trials, and so you still have to invest quite a lot, but it's not billions, it's millions, and so that was really interesting to me. And so I have had this kind of conversation during the recruitment process. I'll be honest, it's probably at the point that they're pretty sure that they want me rather than, in the first conversation. But there's also definitely first conversations that I have and then go, this is a super interesting job, but it's not for me. This is
Yeah.
too early stage. This is
But
too whatever.
but are they not sometimes compensating almost? So you're really good at a bunch of things. You've got great track record of being a technical leader. You maybe don't know the industry so well, but that's okay because you have these other strengths.
Yes, and I think that's exactly the conversation to have, right? Is do you bring enough to the table? Are you, there are dramatic actors who then become great comedic actors, but it's not a given that it will
Yeah.
work. And so I think you have to take that risk together rather than taking it unknowingly.
So let's
And
get into it now. So you've brought with you something that everyone can download.
yeah.
You call it the Careers Vector Framework.
Mm.
And it's designed to help people at the right moment have that conversation and to see whether what you as a technical leader bring matches up with what the expectations of the business are. Before we get into the detail, perhaps you can just explain at a high level what it is and when you think you should be using it, and also what you should do with the output.
Yes. So this came out of a load of different people asking me, how do I get to CTO? And I was like, well, there's different flavors of CTO. And I realized after a while that I was talking through the different flavors as this sort of set of almost like a sliders on a graphic equalizer,
Yeah.
different things you could go, hard or soft on, and you could judge, and then I had the sort of how do I become a CTO, how do I become more senior as a technical leader conversation so many times. I was like, there's
Mm-hmm.
something here, there's something interesting here, and so I developed this into a framework that people can use, and I think you can use it in multiple ways. You can use it to self-assess and go, where are my gaps? What do I want to get better at? What do I want my next role to be, and what's the shape of that, and what will I have to improve at in order to get that next role or that next opportunity. I think you can use it with your manager to get expectations really clear and a development plan really clear. And I think you can also use it just for self-knowledge to figure out which types of roles are good for you to do. There are definitely transformational CTOs and people who are not keen on doing the transformation because they want to do the innovation that comes after it's all transformed, right?
Yeah.
And so I think some of it's just about casting yourself well into different roles.
And to what degree is it context sensitive? I mean, you've already mentioned the domain experience, and also you touched on with Monzo, not exactly a lack of technical knowledge on your part, but a difference in what Monzo wanted or where they were with what you had experienced before. So I guess what I'm trying to say is you could look at you could look at your current job and measure yourself and come up with a set of scores, but then look somewhere else and the scores will be very different.
Yes. So I think the thing that stays similar is the shape that you draw. So it's a sort of web diagram.
Yep.
And I think the shape of you will probably stay will grow over time, but stay somewhat consistent. But yeah, the expectations that you're measuring yourself against change very incredibly with context.
Right.
And one of the last vector I added into the equation is industry specific or domain specific knowledge. And I didn't even think of it in the years when I was in e-commerce and similar, because like everybody understands how e-commerce works. There's
Right.
some
It's a
specifics,
shop.
and
Yeah.
but it's fundamentally it's a shop, and we've all shopped online. So
Yeah.
we've all got some domain experience just by being consumers, and so it's not a very challenging domain to get to grips with. But then I went to, as I said, Healx and was doing drug discovery, and then it matters a lot to understand what preclinical trials are and clinical trials are and how they fit together, and the fact that we can cure lots of things in mice that we can't cure in humans, and all of these kind of things. And so I think it's incredibly contextual. You're right.
Right. Let's get into it.
Mm,
So it's a grid of 6 different dimensions.
yeah.
And for each one, both the business leader and the technical leader measure themselves from 0 to 5 to indicate, in this context, how strong I am or what the level of expectation is.
Yeah.
And then that, as you say, draws a spider diagram and you map the expectations over the top of the capabilities.
Yeah.
And then you see the matches. And also, of course, you see the gaps. Let's step through the dimensions one on one.
Yeah.
So the first one is hands-on tech. And I guess this is probably for a technical leader one of the easiest to understand, right? I'm an engineer. I'm really good at coding. I know how to build systems. I'm sure most technical leaders will look at that and just go, yeah, I'm a 5. Is that fair?
And well, I think it depends when the last time you coded was as to
Right.
whether you're a
Yeah.
5, right? So I wouldn't rate myself as a 5 on hands-on tech anymore. And when I went to Helix, I'm from an AI background, as I mentioned earlier, and so I was very confident that I could catch up on the particular AI that they were using, but I hadn't been in that field for a while, and so I was like, I'm a 2 or a 3 here. And
Hmm.
I've got some catching up to do, because in this particular business as CTO, the the product of the company is so reliant on in-depth knowledge of AI that I really do need to, brush off my textbooks and read a load of papers and understand the latest in knowledge graphing and these different approaches that they were using. And so I think it's context specific. So, it's not can I code? It's what's needed in this situation to be a great CTO. And that's going to depend on the team. It's going to depend on the industry that you're in. It's going to depend on how much tech is the product of the company and all of those kind of things. I know loads of CTOs who haven't coded in 20 years,
Hmm.
and that doesn't make them shit CTOs.
Right.
Like, not understanding what coding is like these days might, but not having personally been hands on keyboard in a while doesn't necessarily preclude you from being great at the job. And I think that you have to find different ways of keeping current if you're not coding every day.
But
Because
do
so
you,
much,
do you do you need to be the strongest technical person in the room? And by strength, I don't necessarily mean the person that understands JavaScript the best, but you're the person that the most senior people in the company will turn to say, "You're the technical person. Give me an answer to this." Do you need to be the best technical person in the company?
I think if you are the best technical person in the company, you've made a massive mistake in hiring, because
Right.
your job is not full-time hands-on keyboard building shit. And so
Right.
if you are the best technical person in the company at hands-on keyboard building shit, and that's not the 90% of your job, then you've made terrible mistakes in hiring. You should be hiring architects and principal engineers and staff engineers who are way better than you. And a
Yeah.
lot of people who end up as CTOs became managers after being, a senior engineer. I
Yeah.
never made it to staff or to principal. I would have loved to. I wish that career path had existed. I think it would have suited me so much better than going into management as early as I did. But I never got there. And so I've had to I wouldn't say I'm only at a senior engineer level in terms of my technical capability. I've found other ways to stay current and to continue to develop in that way. But anywhere where I think I'm the strongest hands-on tech, I think I failed at equipping the company with the right people.
I
Um,
guess you could become a bottleneck, couldn't you, if you were actually? Yeah.
and
So
that's
so
some of that's about the style of CTO role I take. So I take the sort of CTO role, which is quite strategic, it's quite business focused, and it's about leading a large organization. And I think if you're leading a large organization and you're managing and leading a large organization, you have to spend quite a lot of time on that. And so if you don't, but if you're an architect style CTO, then maybe you are one of the strongest. And so I think, I'm not dissing anybody out there who is a CTO who is thinks that they are incredibly strong hands-on tech wise. But I think that you have to go, how much of my job is doing this, and am I spending the right amount of time on each of these different elements of my job?
yeah. And I guess that if you're a founding CTO type person, you kind of are the most senior technical
Yes.
person. So how would a technical person evaluate themselves against this metric? I mean, I'm sure that in your head, the big thing is to go, I can't say I'm a two technically. So how do you evaluate that and come up with a reasonable score?
I This whole thing is judgment. And it's one of the things that engineers in particular find most uncomfortable about this framework is it's a self-assessment and a judgment call. There isn't a hard and fast way of going, a two means exactly this, and this is how you articulate it, and this is how you pin yourself to a score. It's really going, how confident am I in being able to do what's needed of me?
Yeah.
And it,
And
and
getting the best out of the team, I guess, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But yeah, so the first part's hands-on tech, and that's, literally, could you go back to being a staff engineer in the team, in one of your teams today, is one way to evaluate that. The other way to evaluate that is like, do you understand enough that when your team are having an architectural argument, you can contribute? And I
Yeah.
think which of those it is very dependent on which stage of company you're at and all the context, as we said earlier.
And that leads us on very nicely to the second dimension, which is technical strategy.
Yeah.
And I'd love to explore, first of all, what we mean by technical strategy, because I think that it's easy to come up with a simple assumption I mean, at a very simplistic level, it will be, we're going to go TypeScript instead of Kotlin, for example. I mean, that's a technical strategy, but I'm sure that's not what you mean.
So I mean everything from what do we buy versus build, down to which languages do we use, down to what's our architectural strategy, what are our engineering principles, why are we doing what we're doing, and what are we choosing not to do. And I think that, if you read Good Strategy, Bad Strategy, one of the most important things about it, in addition to sort of having a diagnosis and so on, it's a great book and I highly recommend it.
Hmm.
But one of the most important things is to articulate what you're not going to do as well. And there's a fantastic article called, I think it's called Choose Boring Technology,
Oh, I love it.
which
Yeah.
is fantastic. And a lot of tech strategies could probably be summarized as, hey, read that Choose Boring Technology article and we're going to do that.
Yep. And it's one paragraph, isn't it? It's
Yeah,
so
yeah.
short. Yeah. Yeah. I love it. Yeah.
But I think it's very helpful for your organization to articulate, here's what the business is trying to achieve. So here's the business strategy, here's the product strategy, and now this is the strategy tech will follow in order to serve the business and the product needs.
Yeah.
And the unspoken needs of the business and the product as well. So things that we tend to refer to as non-functional requirements, because
Yep.
that makes everybody want to work on them. But security and safety and data privacy and all of these things that everybody else has to, they just assume it's there. We
Hmm.
have to actively care about as well.
Right.
And so I think it's a mix of those things. In some situations, maybe it is as simple as, we're going with TypeScript and microservices, and we'll be on AWS, and don't worry about lock-in on that cloud provider because we have accepted that risk that if we had to move cloud provider, it would take us 2 years.
Yeah.
Fine.
Yeah.
Done.
Yeah.
But I think it's a little more nuanced than that in some other ways. But it's
Yeah.
a big gap quite often in engineering managers. It's what, for me, one of the big differences between an engineering manager and an engineering director or a VP is they get much more involved in the strategic questions and the strategic direction that you're giving the team. Now, in an ideal world, the audience for that strategy is both the senior team, the leadership, to know what major choices are we making about buy versus build and similar, but it also should have enough detail that it's useful to teams on the day-to-day basis for their decision making.
And I don't particularly want to get into the how do you do this part, but very often the technical teams will say, and again, I'm oversimplifying, we have a monolith. We really need to be microservices. And that's an investment of a couple of years, and don't expect any new features from us while we're doing it. Presumably that forms part of the tech strategy. And
Yeah.
going on from that, I'd love to understand, to what degree does the CTO almost push back against that and say, no, keep delivering features, versus you're absolutely right, this is the future and it will enable much bigger growth later on.
Yeah. And I think it all comes down to exactly the thing you alluded to right at the end there, which is why.
Hmm.
Like, we're doing microservices because everybody else is doing
Yep.
microservices.
Yeah.
Shit.
I read a book on it. Yeah.
Yeah, I read a book on it. Blog-driven development and CV-driven development are the worst reasons to do things, right?
CV plus plus, I call it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And so I think it's about going, what does this business need? This business needs to be able to have a much larger set of engineers working in parallel without being hyper dependent on each other. That's a good reason to go with microservices.
Yeah.
But because it's the modern thing or because it's the done thing, that's not a good reason. And so I think it's about that articulation of what's the right thing for the business in the current context and the future context. So, spending 2 years off in the corner re-architecting for future growth, great. But if the company goes bankrupt in those
Yeah.
2
In the
years and
meantime.
haven't delivered
Yeah.
any features, then you're building for a future that won't exist.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I'm actually a big proponent of always continuing to deliver customer value all the way along when you're doing
Yeah.
these kind of transformations, because I think it's so risky to go off into the corner for a couple of years,
Yeah.
fall behind the competition, and there's very few companies that have a 2 or 3 year lead, and these things always take longer than you want them to and cost twice as much, and
Yeah.
are not as successful as you like.
And
Those
they're
kind of
quite
transformations
divisive
are,
as well, I
yeah,
find.
yeah, and those kind of transformations are notoriously difficult.
Yes.
Um, and so I think it's really important to have alignment all the way up and down in the business, both that how you're gonna keep delivering value along the way, and that it's actually worthwhile to make that investment at that scale on that timeline, because that future is coming fast enough that you need it.
Yeah. And I'd love to explore, I can understand how a technical leader would be able to grade themselves on tech strategy because of everything that you have just been through. It's very nuanced, it's very detailed, and is a mixture of sort of macro and micro. And I completely get that. How does a how does a business leader set their score for that? Because I don't know that I've worked for some CEOs who are pretty technical and they can understand these things. But if you're a sort of a business driven CEO, surely you're just going to look at it and go, I just want you to be a 5. Like, I trust you with the tech strategy. Just do it.
Yeah, and some business leaders will be like that. It's one of the ones where they're going to go, well, I just need you to own that. Do you feel comfortable owning it for a company at this size, at this scale? But at this size, at this scale, might need a 3 out of 5. If you were going, how do you become the CTO owning the tech strategy for AWS? I think that's a very different level.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
And so some of the conversation is how much have you done in the past? Because everybody's going to have a first CTO role.
Yeah.
And we don't all have the benefit of starting as a founding engineer and staying CTO through the journey. Most people move in as a CTO at some point. And so that's a reason when you're, an engineering manager, an engineering director, a VP, it's a reason to get involved with that more strategic work is so that you're not touching strategy for the very first time in your first CTO role.
Right.
And so it's one of the questions I ask at interview is, tell me about where you've set strategy for an area or for a company. It doesn't have to be the whole company, but like, tell me about how you set strategy. Who do you involve? Who do you talk to? Who do you consult? Who do you get advice from? Do you try to crowdsource it from your entire engineering team, or do you
Hmm.
go in with a set of guidance that then shapes it? Do you sit in the corner and write it on your own and then just try and deploy it at everybody, right? Those kind of things I think are really interesting. But you're right, many business leaders will want you to just be good enough at it for the company as it is right now and to be able to fully own it. And actually knowing whether your CEO is going to be like, that's your job, or whether they're going to want to have really active conversation and trade-off discussions with you. And
Yeah.
that's a really important data point when you're taking a role. And I personally have a preference for, I don't need them to be technical, but I do need them to care about the trade-offs that we're making. And
Yeah.
I'll do all the work to translate and to make it make sense and to make it understandable in business terms. But if somebody thinks that they can be completely insulated from all of the strategic choices that are being made in technology at a tech company, that's not a good sign, right?
Yeah.
And so it tells you something about the style of CEO that you're working for as well.
And I guess no matter how you do it, at some point you're going to have done all of this background work and you're going to bring it forward to the leadership team and say, I back this. It's my decision. I own it. And now I sort of stand or fall by it. So if you're not technical and if you don't understand strategy, if you don't understand the business, then you're going to make an ill-informed choice. And that leads,
Or you're not going to do it at all, which is actually the biggest risk, which
correct. Yeah.
lots of people do, is they don't actually ever write a strategy down
Yeah.
for the tech side.
So they just let the thing evolve behind them almost. Yeah. And that this sort of leads very nicely onto the third dimension, which is delivery. Now, in my simple brain, delivery just seems like table stakes. I
Yes.
can't imagine a situation where a leader would say, don't worry about delivery. A score of 1 is fine. And I equally can't imagine a technical leader coming forward and saying, yeah, I understand the tech, but I'm not very good at the delivery stuff. So I'm like a 1. I can't imagine a situation where it's very rarely not a 5 on both sides.
Yeah, and I think um, you have to say what's needed in this context again. Sorry, I'm being repetitive. But there are some. If you're an architect style CTO, maybe it's okay to be shit at delivery, but there'd better be a great VPN who's good at it.
Right.
And so some of it's about the team you're surrounding yourself with as well.
Yeah.
It's one of the reasons I've got a very strong opinion that end managers should be partly responsible for delivery in their teams. And I, at one point in my career, experimented with the sort of pure people manager approach for engineering management, and it works. It's fine.
Hmm. Hmm.
But the engineering managers aren't very fulfilled because they feel too far away from the tech that is what got them into the industry in the first place. Their teams often feel that they lack context on what they're doing day to day, and often there's then problems with stuff getting done. Um, but there are circumstances where you have almost dedicated people for the delivery side of things. There are some businesses where there are fantastic project managers, program managers, TPMs,
Yeah.
and folks like that. And so I think it's a, I don't think you have to be a 5 on delivery, but I think you have to have a way for the organization to be good at delivery. And sometimes that's going to be, you accept that you are shit as a project manager. It's not your bag, it's not your thing, but you better have somebody in your leadership then who's great at it.
Right.
And so, I think the thought that everybody can be 5 out of 5 on all of these dimensions, it's an attractive thought, but two things are problematic. It's very difficult to be 5 out of 5 on all of these dimensions. And if you are, what are you learning?
Yeah.
And are any
Yeah.
of us really happy if we're learning nothing in the role that we're in, right?
Yeah.
I think particularly technologists, because the industry changes so much, we get addicted to learning. And so I think it's actually a mistake to take a role that you're wildly overqualified for, that you can do in your sleep, unless you've got something going on in your life that means that work has to be doable in your sleep. Like
Yeah.
I accept that there are sometimes personal circumstances that mean you need a job that is fully within your capabilities and not a huge growth opportunity. But I think most of the time we want to be growing in what we're doing.
Yeah. I
And so,
agree.
yeah, so but you know what? Being a fantastic technical project or program manager, that takes years.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah, it's
there
quite
are-
a specialist skill, isn't it? I've worked with some really good TPMs, and I take them aside and say, "You're bloody awesome at what you do, and I could not do your job." But they fill in such a hole, and they make you and the organization look so much better because they knock the job out of the park.
yeah, but you can't, I don't think there's many CTOs who've gone all the way to principal engineer hands on
Yeah.
and done loads of technical strategy and have been the equivalent of a fantastic technical program manager or technical product manager, and I
Hmm.
think it's very, unless we're going to say it takes you minimum 30 years to get to CTO because you have to cycle through doing all
Yeah.
of these different roles, then it's difficult. But like,
Yeah.
I spent a few years as a project program and product manager. Does that make me better as a CTO? Absolutely, it does. It really
Hmm.
helps.
Hmm.
And delivery is one of the things that I'm very strong on because I can personally do it as well as create the system in which it goes very, very well. But I'm also really annoying if you're my head of delivery because I've got all sorts of opinions about work in progress limits and agile and the way that we work.
Hmm.
Kanban and Scrum can coexist and all of these kind of things because I used to do it. But I think that there are equally fantastic CTOs who don't have those detailed opinions and just hire the right person and trust them and achieve the same outcome.
And that raises a question in my mind, which is this what you just touched on. To what degree does a CTO almost accept what's around them and then just sort of manage it the best they can? And to what degree do they say, no, no, I have opinions, I have experience, and actually I'm going to change the way things happen
Mm.
to fit what, my experience and what I expect?
Again, I think depends on what the business needs. So if you come in and you reshape the team around yourself, you better be staying for a while.
Right.
So if you're a very unusual shape of technical leader, then you can shape everything around you, and maybe you're lucky and there's budget and headcount to hire the right people. But it's not often a successful strategy to come in and change everybody.
Right. Okay. And it leads very nicely onto the fourth dimension, which is organization management. And I think at a simplistic level, correct me if I'm wrong, it's the pretty much the people management part of it, the structure, the team shapes, the individuals, the hiring, the firing, all the rest of it that goes with that.
Yeah.
And I imagine that most people who arrive into a CTO role will have been an engineering manager, maybe a director, maybe a VP.
Yeah.
So at what point does management turn into leadership?
Oh, I think they're different things. There's a great anecdote in Seven Habits of Highly Successful People, I think, which is the manager is the one who, you're hacking your way through a jungle. The manager is the one who organizes people into shifts and makes sure that somebody's cooking dinner and not everybody's chopping down trees, and collects water, and, make sure that the operation runs efficiently and well, and that people are looked after and nobody's dropping dead along the way.
Yeah,
The leader's the one who climbs the tallest tree, looks around and goes, wrong fucking forest, right?
right.
And I think that there's this conflation of leadership and management in tech in particular. I think staff engineers are just as much leaders as engineering managers. And there can be managers who are not good leaders. They're not good at giving direction or inspiring the team to achieve something difficult, or whatever else. And so I think it's a slightly different skill set. I know a lot of people believe that leadership is sort of intrinsic. I don't. I think everything's learnable but you've got to be motivated to want to learn it, and get good at it. And so yeah. So I think this fourth vector is sort of organizational management and leadership.
Yep.
I think at the most senior level as a technical leader, you have to lead as well as manage. But at certain levels, it might be more about management, and it might be
And
more pure
and
management.
how does somebody coming up through the ranks, as it were, develop those leadership skills? Because I think that I completely agree with you, by the way. I think the management is largely about, and I'm going to oversimplify, but almost execution. It's about making sure shit gets done, really. And leadership is, as you say, setting that direction. Um, and if you have come up through the ranks, engineer, now I'm a manager, and then you progress up, at which point do you learn that leadership skills? Because if you're an engineer, your capacity to lead is relatively small. You can influence and all the rest of it, but largely you're following instructions, to put it simplistically. But as you move up, of course, you are then trusted with, okay, now where are we going to go next? What's your decision? Where should we go?
Yeah.
How does somebody coming up through the ranks develop that leadership skill?
So I like to do it in two ways. I like there to be a tech lead role in the actual product team. So I think that's a way of giving somebody at senior engineer or above an opportunity to practice leading, without having people's careers on the line. That, they're not managers, they're not responsible for the
Got it.
humans, but they are responsible for the tech. And so I think giving technical direction is something you can learn early in your career, or sorry, earlier in your career, not early, but you can do that as a senior manager, as a senior engineer, as a staff engineer, and similar. And so I think that type of leadership, it's one of the reasons I'm a big proponent of there being a tech lead hat. It's not really a title or a
Yep.
level that you get to, but it's a role you play in a team.
It's a
And then I think
responsibility almost, isn't it? Yeah.
yes, yeah, exactly
Yep.
that. And then I think on the engineering manager track, the main opportunity is to start to get more involved in direction as time goes on. And so that'll often look like an engineering manager being asked to lead something that's across multiple teams or multiple
Yep.
areas. Even things like refreshing the career paths is something that's a project that could require a lot of leadership, because you could run that just as a project, but if you don't inspire people to
Hmm.
want to achieve it, then you're going to have a very lackluster response and a very mediocre output, right?
Yep.
And so I think that what I try to do with my engineering managers, senior engineering managers, directors, VPs, etc., is sort of give them larger and larger things to lead on, larger and larger decisions to make, and areas to define the direction for. And the earlier you are on that journey, the more safety net there is. So here's a bunch of givens, now you make this size, this small size decision, and lead people through it. Next time it's a bigger one, next time it's a bigger one, next
Yep.
time it's a bigger one. And then I think as a CTO, you get to the point of sometimes you can delegate a whole area to somebody. At Pleo, I had a fantastic VP called Camille Hakim, and he led all of recruitment for me. And that doesn't mean I'm not interested in recruitment. I am very interested in recruitment, have lots of opinions about it, love doing employer branding, and entry-level programs and all of that kind of stuff. But it was a great opportunity for him to lead on a important area for the company that made him more visible at the exec level as well. And I think that's the responsibility of your manager, is to understand what you want to get better at, and where you're at in terms of leadership and management, and give you more and more experience. And in the same way, on the management side, you go from managing individual contributors to managing individual contributors who are more senior than you ever got to, which is
Yep.
the first hurdle many EMs go through, to then managing other managers, to then doing more technical strategy and managing other managers. And so I think there is quite a good progression on the management track as well, to and then eventually you get to you're managing managers of managers of managers,
Yeah.
and you're at an ever greater layer of abstraction away from the people who are actually doing the work on a day-to-day basis. And how do you accept that, but also make sure that it doesn't get in the way of great work happening?
And I presume that organization management doesn't stop at sort of you and below. You need to also lead and influence and manage your boss, maybe the CEO, and maybe other C-suite members, and maybe other senior people around the company.
Yeah, and same thing with technical strategy. Like, one of the major audiences for technical strategy is your own team, but one of the audiences is your peers.
Yeah,
And
product,
and
marketing, sales.
yeah, exactly that.
And that leads us very nicely, I think, onto the next dimension, which is commercial.
Yeah.
And I imagine that this is one that is maybe newest and freshest for people coming up through the ranks, as it were, because I think, and again, I like to oversimplify it, but as you're coming up through the ranks, you're almost following orders. You're sort of saying, "Here's a business goal, do something to make it happen." But as you become more senior, you're not only responsible for the commercial success of the company, but maybe you're also making big decisions around how you will achieve that.
Yeah, and it's one of my favorite examples, actually, for the difference between a regular engineer and a staff or principal engineer who's also making big architectural decisions, which tend to be made by engineers these days. We're luckily
Yep.
moved away from the ivory tower PowerPoint soldier archetype
We
that
love them.
existed for a while. Yeah. um, too many slides.
Yep.
But I think that one of the things that's really important when you're making major architectural decisions is, cool, what's it going to cost?
Right.
You can make choices that mean that your hosting costs are going to go through the roof, that your observability costs are going to go through the roof. I've been at organizations where they're spending as much on Datadog as they are on AWS,
Oh, yes.
right?
Yep.
Then that's a easy trap to fall into. And so I think that commercial understanding becomes very important when you're making bigger architectural decisions, when you're making these days, when you're making decisions about what to use which type of AI for. It's often much more expensive to use LLMs than to use traditional machine learning, and I think these increasingly become part of the equation. What's the return on investment, what's the payback period, and you start to need to talk in those type of terms that are financial terms. They're what you learn from talking with your CFO. It's, can you read a profit and loss statement? Do you understand how your company is actually doing right now? And I think that it's very common, actually, for people not to have any idea how the company is doing, and just to think, my job's just to ship the roadmap.
Yeah.
Like, I'll just get done what I'm asked to do, and hope that the people who decided that we should do it were right. And I think the more senior you get, the more involved you are in those discussions and those trade-offs. And they are trade-offs, right? Like I said earlier, one of the great joys of Monzo was how incredibly high the technical talent bar was. But it opened up a whole bunch of architectural options that, in another company that couldn't afford engineers that good, wouldn't have been possible.
Mm.
It just wouldn't have been reasonable to expect them to deal with the level of complexity that some of those choices indicated. So, Monzo for a long time was one of the largest ever Cassandra users, and that was one of the innovation tokens. The big bets that they made was like, what, eventual consistency, this style of database and this particular technology will be the key to where we go. And it's one of the reasons that Monzo, you you pay in store, and you probably trust that it's gonna come up in your app faster than it comes up on the terminal.
Yeah.
And you probably trust that your payments and your direct debits and everything else, like, you can have real-time visibility of your money in a way that many traditional banks have no way of doing. They've got
Yeah.
batch processing that happens at 4 a.m. and that's when things are going to update. They're not going to be done in real time, and that was a commercial choice as much as it was a technology choice, and a really important one for the business in the end.
And it's interesting, as you were explaining that, one thought I had was earlier on, we spoke about moving technology away from being a cost center, but something which, delivers value. And you touched on Datadog, and Datadog can be really, really expensive, but
Yeah,
and again, I'm oversimplifying. I've been in situations where we have saved a bit of money, but then you
mm,
have an incident and you go, why? So it's
yeah,
almost like an insurance.
yeah,
So it's for the right situation, it can be a really valuable expense because of the protection it affords you.
yeah.
How, in this commercial dimension, as a technology leader, how do you explain all of those things? I think a CFO will look at the AWS bill and go, yeah, I get it completely. But this big thing, Datadog,
Yeah, what's that for?
talk me through that.
Yeah. And I think that you have to learn to speak in their language in order to help it make sense, right? And so the way that I have explained things like observability in the past is to go, you've got to imagine that the main system is our financial accounts, but the observability is our management information. Like, that's the difference here. So one of them is just the bare bones, exactly what's happening. But when you're trying to add meaning to it, you need a different view on the data. This is that different
Yeah.
view on the data for us as engineers. And that then they go, okay, if I think of it as management information reporting, then I understand that it's an additional thing that's needed. And when they look at their own costs in finance, they've obviously got a load of costs related to the bare bones accounting, but they also have a load of people building dashboards and
Yep.
reports and making sure budget owners know what they've spent and whether they've got any money left and all of those kind of things, right? And so I think part of the value of this commercial skill set is to learn the language of the other functions, and to learn the language of sales, the language of finance, the language of marketing, and be able to translate better for them. And I think that's one of the big roles that we have as CTOs, as technical leaders, is we look after a thing that, bluntly, not everybody wants to understand and not everybody
Hmm.
can take the time to understand. I'm sure they're all capable, but whether they're, in their day to day, do they have time to need to learn exactly what the difference between, Swift and, various different programming languages or frameworks or whatever else? We have to be able to put it in terms that are understandable to the broader business. And I think that that's really important. And so I think in this commercial thing it's about, a lot of it's about finance, but it's also just about general business understanding. And you can make choices in technology that will be the difference between your company being profitable and not,
Yeah.
or certainly when they're going to get profitable and not.
And to what degree is commercial awareness a factor of experience? So, very simplistically, I'm an engineer, I've got zero experience, put me into a CTO role, I'm going to be zero. Whereas someone like you, you've been, in senior leadership positions for a number of years, you've been in the room and you understand, it's just a factor of your experience and time served rather than sort of context and peculiarities of this particular role.
I think that's one way to gain that understanding. I think there are other ways though. When I was at university, I did a course called Accounting for Non-Accounting Students, and there's a book by the same name that's fantastic. And
I
so
think I have it actually.
yeah,
Yeah.
I came out of university understanding how to read a P&L, and
Yep.
my mum's an accountant, my dad's a mechanical engineer. Like, I've never been scared of numbers or scared of understanding how things really work, and that's been a real advantage to me in my career. And so I think some of it you can book learn, some of it you can skills exchange. The VP of finance at Moo and I got very close, and I taught him a load about tech and why our capitalization was really difficult to do, and he taught me a load about finance and VCs and investors and how our investor relations was working, which I hadn't had that exposure at P&G or in the government, because it's a very different environment. You're
Yeah.
not doing investor relations, even if you're very senior at P&G, it's a very top level thing to get involved in, and it's a specialist department as well in that kind of context because it's, such a large company. And so I think that, there's lots of ways to learn this. Some of it you can just absorb by osmosis over many, many years. But if you are putting yourself in a situation where, you're going from being a regular engineer in a product team to then making big architectural decisions, or maybe you're in a platform team now or similar, you can choose to go learn it. And I think it's I did a session a few years ago at Leading Edge, which is the sort of director plus version of lead dev, that was basically like commercial basics for engineering leaders, and it's probably the session I got the most positive feedback on that I've ever done in my life, because it was simply explaining a bunch of stuff that people kind of had been exposed to, because it was
Yeah.
a room full of directors and above. They're all managers of managers, but not all of them really understood, like, why are we doing capitalization?
Yeah.
What is this R&D tax credit thing for?
Yeah.
I get that we get some money back. I have to write some big reports, but like, why? Why do we get money back? What's the government's trying to incentivize us to innovate? This is why this thing exists. People have taken advantage of it a bit, so they're pulling back on it now, and like that kind of thing. And so I don't think the only way is to just sit back and wait for it to come to you. I think you can go to it as well.
And it sounds like almost a competitive advantage for you if you have invested the time and you can show up with that. And finally, the sixth dimension, which is domain depth. And again, with my simplistic brain sitting here, that would seem to me to be the biggest variance. I mean, I've worked in media, I've worked in finance, I've worked in banking, I've worked in gambling, I've worked in product all sorts of stuff. And very rarely do I rock up and go, yeah, I completely understand this domain because I've been there before.
Yeah. And I think that's perfectly normal, right? But there are also people who go, you know what, my entire career is going to be in the financial securities arena, and I'm
Yeah.
going to just build systems for that. I'm going to build quant systems for actuaries and accountants, and I'm going to deeply understand what they do and how they do it. Like, if you think you can go and build, FTSE systems, stock market systems without understanding what a stockbroker does, I think you're dreaming, right?
Yeah.
And so I think it varies by role how understandable the domain is. From just being a human being, like we said earlier, e-commerce is not hard to wrap your head
Yeah.
around because we've all bought something online. But actually, there are areas of e-com, like actually exactly how you do distribution and shipping, how much stock you hold at any given moment. All of those kind of things are genuinely interesting technical and planning problems. And so I think I say something sometimes which is like, every role is capable of virtuosity and every role is deserving of virtuosity. Like, I think that there are people in every domain and every industry who are fantastically in depth at,
Yeah.
at that industry, and you need somebody to understand it in depth. Does it have to be you as the CTO? Maybe not.
And
But
to what degree do you lean on people like the CPO or your product directors? Almost, look, mate, you've got the domain, you understand the problems that we're trying to solve, you understand the customers. Just tell me what you want and I'll get it delivered.
I think that determines whether you end up as a servant or a leader.
Right.
And ideally a servant leader, right? Which I'm a big fan of. But I think if you want tech to have an equal seat at the table, you have to understand the business just as well as the other execs do. And I think that's an increasing expectation of CTOs, is that we're not the techie in the corner who just cares about the tech. We're a general executive who happens to be responsible for the technology. And
Yeah.
that's what a lot of CTO interviews are about at a certain scale and size of company, is, are you going to be a good addition to the sort of group brain of the executive team, or are you just going to not contribute at all because, oh well, you didn't mention software, so it's nothing to do
Yeah.
with me.
Yeah.
And I think that the days of us being able to be the techie in the corner who doesn't give a shit about anything else, like, you don't accept that in a marketing leader. They have to care about the broader business. You don't accept it in a finance leader. They have to care about the broader business. Now, there are finance leaders who are like, if it isn't a spreadsheet, I don't give a shit.
Yeah.
I don't think they're the most successful ones, though.
Yeah, they're hardest to work with, aren't they? And I've mentioned this a few times on the show. I have a very strict hierarchy in my head, which is customer, company, team, self. And that
Yeah.
drives almost everything that we do. And if it doesn't start with the customer or understand that the company only exists to solve customer problems and take money from them, and how that trickles down into what I do on my keyboard today, we're all a bit screwed, right? I think you've got to understand that. Meri, thank you. That's brilliant. We've just been through your 6 dimensions, and I love the explanations of each one. I understand that. Can we talk now about the practice?
Mm.
So, you know, we've got this framework, and I'm going to sit down with, I'm a CTO, I'm going to sit down with my CEO, and we're going to do this exercise. What does that look like in practice?
So the last time I did it with a CEO, I self-assessed first. So I said, I think, and Helix is a good example. I had led bigger teams. I had led bigger projects and programs. I'd had bigger budgets. I'd had, I'd done strategy for a lot more people in a much larger organization and that kind of stuff. And so I was a little, like, arguably a little overqualified on some of
Right.
these dimensions,
Yeah.
right? Like from a, tech strategy point of view, a delivery point of view, an organizational leadership, and even a commercial point of view, I was very confident. I was like, I've got this.
Yeah.
I'm probably more than you need. I'm worried I'm going to be bored, right?
Right.
On domain depth, like we talked about earlier, I was a patient, but I wasn't a scientist, and I hadn't done any clinical trials or preclinical work, and so I had a massive gap there. And then on AI, I was okay, but I wasn't fully up to date with the latest science, right? And so that was the conversation that I went and had with Tim, was like, here's the shape I think this role has, and this is where I think my gaps are against that shape. And so you start with, what does the role need?
Yeah.
Then
And
you
by
go,
the way, it sounds like you're guessing that almost at the beginning.
yes,
You're saying, I think this
yes,
is what the role needs, rather than the CEO saying, this is the sort of person I'm looking for.
yes. And that's because my experience is that a lot of the time you get these CTO job specs that are just do everything all the time, all at once.
Yeah.
And I think it doesn't match reality very often. Um, and so I start with, here's my self-assessment of what the role needs and where I am against those needs. And then I go and say, firstly, with just what the role needs, do you agree with this shape?
Right.
And one of the ways you can actually use this framework as well is to articulate the shape of different roles within your organization. And you're right that at CTO level, it probably is a more rounded shape than at
Yeah.
many other levels. But you know what? If you want to talk, let's talk about how a technical program manager's role is different from an engineering manager's role. You know what? TPM, massively more on delivery, much less tech strategy, probably got nobody reporting into them. They're not a line manager, whereas an eng manager's got loads of people reporting to them,
Yeah.
some delivery, bit of tech strategy. Maybe they even need a little bit of hands-on tech and starting to need a little bit of commercial, right? And so I think actually it's a very useful framework at earlier stages as well when you're developing towards these roles. But then I think you can take it and go, is this the right shape for this role? And you do run the risk that many CEOs are going to be like, yeah, you got to be brilliant at everything. And then
Yeah.
you go, cool. As a CEO, are you brilliant at everything that's required of your role?
Yes, I
You have
am. Yes.
the areas, right? And that's one of the conversations you can have.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I think you compare where you're at. And then one of the things that it's genuinely useful for is then to go, cool, so my development plan, my learning plan, I'm going to be really focused on understanding how preclinical and clinical work happens. And I'm going to be reading a load of papers and getting up to speed with the latest in this type of AI used in this kind of setting, right? And it meant that some stuff that would have been spent time on during onboarding around delivery and that kind of thing, I was like, we can do it if you want, but I'm feeling fairly
Yeah.
confident about that. So I don't think you need to, because if you were doing an onboarding plan just for the job spec, it would be equal parts, all of those things, right?
Yeah.
And the opportunity is to go, I'm actually feeling fairly confident on this part, this part, this part, this part. I think I've got to focus on these two big gaps for the next period. But one of the sorry,
Does that need humility and vulnerability? Because you're almost saying, and again, I'm oversimplifying, I'm not good enough for this role in this dimension, and I have a learning path.
yes, and I think I personally think it sets the tone for your relationship with your manager in a very positive way, to start by admitting what you don't know and what you are hoping to grow at. It's my favorite interview question when I'm hiring people is, what are you looking to learn in your next role? And if they are not going to learn the thing that they want to learn in the next role, they're probably not the right person to cast in that role.
Right.
If I've got somebody who goes, well, what I really want to get into is like detailed microservices architecture, but they're in an EM role, I'd be like, should we talk about staff engineer role? Should we talk
Yeah.
about a different type of role for you? Because this role will be all about people management and delivery, and not very much about hands-on tech, and not very much about architecture and strategy. Are you sure this is the role that you want? And I had that example with Amazon tends to call the people who are thought of as engineering managers, they call them software development managers, SDMs. But when you talk to people who've been at Amazon, that's a very delivery focused role. They view their role is to make sure the team gets shit done.
Yeah.
That's very different from making sure the team achieves its potential as individuals and as a team. And if you take somebody in an SDM shape and push them into a role which is an EM shape, then their people are unhappy because they don't feel like they're getting enough development from their manager. They don't feel looked after. They're expecting that of their manager. And now they've got somebody with a clipboard shouting at them because they're not meeting their deadlines because they're so delivery focused, and it doesn't work. And I've had that exact example of somebody who I brought in who thought the role was all about delivery. I thought the role was much more about organizational leadership and management, and they didn't succeed in that setting. But they absolutely succeeded in other settings where the primary responsibility of that role was delivery. And so I think it's back to this concept of casting. Are you the
Yes.
right person for the right role at the right time at this stage in the company? And taking into account who is around you. Because sometimes the company needs a 5, but 3 of it comes from you. And the other 2 points come from somebody in your team.
And to a
Or
degree also, I mean, we talked a bit about the actors and casting. I mean, an actor performs and I'm a straight actor and now I'm going to perform a comedy. You can sort of adapt for the circumstance. So in your SDM versus EM situation, it could be that I go into an SDM situation and I'm just going to focus on delivery more than anything else because that's my role.
yeah.
But then 2 weeks later, you say, great, now come across here and be an EM. I'll say, oh, sure, okay, now I will adapt and pull on my strengths, which are around management and organization and people management, right? So a
But
score
how
doesn't necessarily define you, does it?
it doesn't. It doesn't. If you've had an opportunity to develop that other vector.
Yeah. Okay.
But if you've
Yeah.
only worked on delivery your whole career,
Yeah.
you've been a hands-on engineer and then you've been a delivery manager effectively, what gives me confidence that you can manage 10 people? You've never managed anybody before. And so again, like one of the things I do in my organizations is I have a role which is for like a tech lead manager,
Yeah.
which Google's a big fan of as a permanent thing. I think it's something you should only do for a year. And I think that because it's very difficult to juggle the manager schedule and the maker schedule. It's very hard to be doing in-depth IC work and trying to manage people, because one of them is very
Yes.
meetings focused and interrupt driven, and one of them is deep focus, get load a bunch of stuff in your head,
Yeah.
solve a difficult problem. And I think for about a year, you can juggle the two. So you give somebody 3 or 4 people to manage, so a lower management load than typical, and you have them continue to deliver as an IC. And that gives them the opportunity to try out this management thing, learn some of the skills, see if they're any good at it, and keep doing the thing they're already good at. Because being completely terrible at your job is a very upsetting experience for
Yeah.
people. And so it's not great to take someone who's never managed anyone and be like, cool, here are your 12 people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Welcome to management. Day 1,
Yeah.
12 people to do one-to-ones with. Good luck.
Yeah. And now do the performance review. Thank
Yeah,
you.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so I think that there's this opportunity to shape roles in a way that that lets people gain those new skills and gain that capability and become more flexible and more able to do a different variety of shapes of role.
And coming back to that shape thing, this might be a great time for you to bring up your Pokemon quote.
Yes, it's not Pokemon. You don't have to catch them all. So it's very, very tempting to go, you've got to be 5 out of 5 on everything. And there definitely are some CEOs who will say that, and you have to walk them through it and talk them through it and everything else. But like, even if you never talk to your CEO about this, if you never talk with your manager about this, I think it's genuinely still a useful thing to go, what's expected of me and where am I at? What's my gap? What do I have to learn? And then how you close that gap is completely up to you. Some people, I love swallowing books. I learn wonderfully well from reading. Some people haven't read a book since university
Yeah.
or never went to uni and never read a business book in their lives or a technical book in their lives and are never going to, right? And I have worked with somebody who is that exact thing, doesn't have the attention span, can't read a book and gain anything from it, still fantastic at their job, just learns in a different way than me. And
Yeah.
so some people it's conference talk, some people it's blog posts, some people it's they need a person to sit with them and teach them a thing, right? And you can do skill swaps with people across the organization where you're like, hey, I can teach you a load about tech. Would you like to learn? And you teach me a load about finance or marketing or sales, or let me join a couple of sales calls just to see how difficult it is to do cold calling, right? And I think that kind of stuff. And so I think the self-knowledge is a huge part of the value, but also starting to go, what kind of shape do I want to be? I don't think anybody can be all things to all people.
Yeah.
And happiness and fulfillment comes from understanding what you're great at and getting to do it more frequently. In that First Break All the Rules book, one of the 12 questions is, do I get to do what I am best at every day? And that's one of the predictors of high performance and happiness is, do I get to do what I am best at every day? And in an ideal world, you form a team going, well, you're great at this, you're great at that, you're great at this. So what's missing in this team and what we should be looking for next time we hire is somebody who also is good at these things. You know, we've got somebody who's fantastic on the back end, but front end we've got a bunch of full stack people, but they're not really specialists. They're not in depth on accessibility and all these other kind of things. So what this team needs is to be 5 out of 5 on a range of factors, but that doesn't mean the individual has to be that. And I think actually by trying to have a single pattern or shape for everybody, you end up leveling everybody out to be sort of mediocre, because
Yeah.
going from shit to good,
Yeah.
going from shit to mediocre takes energy. I'd much rather somebody spent that going from good to great or great to amazing. Like I would take spiky people, so people who are great at things and don't have too many what they're called controlling weaknesses in HR speak, right? Which is something that's essential for the job that you suck at.
Right. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
a weakness, but it's a controlling weakness because it's essential for the job and you suck at it. You can suck at all sorts of things and still be great at your job. Average engineer does not need to be a great public speaker.
Yes.
Never.
And imagine also, like, once you understand this and it almost gives you an identity, it might even be easier to say no to stuff, because that's always a big struggle, right?
Yeah. That's probably the way I have guided people to use it most frequently, is to go, you need to look at what is the role you've got now and how do you compare against it? What's the role you want next?
Yeah.
And are the gaps you will have to close gaps you are interested in closing? Because you know what? If you don't want to get better at something, the chances that you will put all that effort in to actually improve at it and feel uncomfortable and not be good at something for a
Yeah.
while and have that discomfort and that growth, like, you're not going to do it unless you're really motivated to. And so, sometimes you want that promotion enough that you'll do something you don't really enjoy, that you're not really good at, in order to get better at it. But on the whole, people love being great at what they do, and I think most people want to be good at what they do. One of my like core beliefs is, very few people wake up on a Monday morning going, today I am aiming for just south of mediocre. And if I could mess up everybody else's day along the way, my day would be perfect. Like, assholes exist, we find them, we should exit them. But like,
Yeah.
most people come to work wanting to be good at what they do.
Yeah.
And one of the things that frustrates me in tech is that we are a bit snobby about that. We look at somebody with a job that we wouldn't want to do, and we assume that anybody who's doing that must be terrible at it because it's so demotivating.
Yeah.
And we're not respectful of other roles and other specialties. And actually, maybe there's a huge amount of fulfillment in that role. It's just not for you. And it not
Yeah,
being for you
totally.
doesn't mean it's not for anybody.
Yeah, I come back to the TPM thing. I couldn't be a TPM, right? It's just not my thing. And I look at it and I think, I couldn't do what you do every day, but I know they're great and I know what value they bring. Um, and as we wrap it up, I know that we began all of this conversation by talking primarily about very senior leaders,
Mm.
CTOs, CEOs, and what it's like at that sort of very top end. But as we've been speaking, it's become really apparent to me that this applies at pretty much any level.
Yeah.
You could be an engineer and say, okay, how do I fit? Because
Mm.
things like domain experience, for example, may be just as relevant at there as at anywhere else. So do you agree with that? Do you think that almost anybody could do this framework?
Yes, and actually in the I think we can link to it afterwards. The original version of this I did as a talk at Lead Dev at one
Yes.
point, and one of the things I cover in that is how you can use this to articulate what different shapes of role are within your organization. And so an engineer role in one organization might have very little domain depth, but in another organization, or maybe even within an organization, you have a load more domain depth. So when I was at Moo, the people who needed the most domain depth in printing were the people who did stuff like placing the stuff to be printed on the page the most
Hmm.
efficient way, so that you got the most stickers or postcards or business cards or whatever out of each sheet of paper. And you think a home printer is a pain in the ass, you wait till you've got a million
Yeah.
pound printer, it is even worse. And those folks, they really needed to get in depth about exactly how printing worked, because doing your job right as an engineer in that area meant that you had to have that domain depth. Now, if I move somebody from that team into the sort of team that did the front page of the website and, listing things and e-commerce and whatever, did they need as much depth on exactly how printing worked? No, they probably didn't need that much depth of the domain generally, because, like we talked earlier, most people understand e-commerce. But I think it can be very helpful at all levels, and it can even help you to articulate as a leader what the shapes of different roles are within your organization as well. And
Yeah.
like a classic one is architect versus principal engineer, or staff engineer versus senior engineer.
Yeah.
Like a lot of people struggle with the move from senior to staff because it's about broadening your perspective, understanding more of the commercials and the strategy and the architecture, and working across multiple teams. And there's not much that you've done as a senior engineer within a team that has prepared you for that work, right? And it's another one of those challenging progression points where it feels a lot like starting over rather than just progressing. And I think
And,
that's,
and I guess it could even feed into career frameworks and even job
yeah,
descriptions, right?
yeah. So I think of this as a sort of, in the worst case, it's a replacement or a temporary crutch to let you cope without there being a career path for you.
Right.
And often at the CTO level, there's very seldom anything written down at all about what the career path is for a CTO. So often CTOs need it more than anybody else. But I think at earlier levels, in the best situation, this is an augment to your career path, because it helps you go, oh, hang on, if I go this route on the career path,
Yeah.
that's this kind of shape, and I would have to get better at X and Y and Z. And if I go that route on the career path, then I'm going from 1 and I've got to get to 4 on people management, but I'm really excited to do that. I'm really keen to get into it. I love the people side of my job. I've grown to enjoy coaching and mentoring the most of anything that I do as an engineer. I'm willing to go back to being a beginner at management and then learn my way from there.
Yeah.
I'm motivated to do it. And I think it can be useful as a sort of overlay to career paths as well.
So I think we've been through the framework now, Mary.
Mhm.
It's superb. Thank you so much indeed. I always like to ask my guests a final question, which is, if someone's listening to this and they're thinking, yeah, this would be great to sort of map out my role and my expectations, what's the one single thing that they should do?
Remember that it's not Pokemon and you don't have to catch them all. Don't default to going, I've got to be brilliant at everything in order to do this role. Really think about what is the shape of what you need to do, what do you need to achieve, and are you willing to get better at the things that you need to get better at? Because there's nothing more demotivating than being in a role where you don't meet all the expectations, but you're not motivated to get better at the things that are needed.
Right. Thank you. Mary, this has been like amazing. It's been great to have you on the show in the first place. So thank you for being here. Um, but I absolutely love the concept of this framework. I've built many, well, 3 or 4 career frameworks. And so you sort of dive into this area. And whilst I haven't been a CTO, I've been pretty senior. And I'm very well aware that there is this mismatch sometimes. And that mismatch is pretty uncomfortable because now suddenly people around you have this expectation that you're going to be good at something, and you're not actually in that situation. It's like, maybe in my experience, it's typically the domain. I don't know this domain very well, and therefore I don't truly understand the customers or what the product is trying to achieve for the customers. And it's quite exposing because suddenly people around you are asking questions and asking you to make decisions. And you're like, yeah, I'm going to make it up a bit. I don't really know. So I think this framework is so valuable. And I think if people can overcome the vulnerability and the humility to say, yeah, this is my shape, pretty strong here, really good match here, but you know what? This is my learning gap. Or even be strong enough to say, and therefore I think I discount myself from this role.
Mm.
I think this will help people end up in the right position. It will help CEOs hire the right people. And much more importantly, it will drive the right results. So thank you so much indeed for bringing it to us today.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been really cool.
Great. And if you're watching or listening, you can always go to buildyouredge.org/downloads. And there you'll find everything that every guest has left. Meri's career vector framework will be there. And we will also put in all sorts of contact details for Meri. So if you really wanted to reach out and talk about this, reach out to her on LinkedIn. We'll put all those details in. Meri, once again, thank you so much indeed for joining me today. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And we'll see you next time.